At Friday 221. Um, I was really looking for entries for buys. My bias was definitely bullish, just looking at the overall market and where price was. Um, but also, after kind of trading a little bit above the gap that we created with DeepSeek, um, and kind of that sort of move as far as big tech and how that affected NQ. We had gotten a couple days last week very tight and coiled small range sort of days. So in reality, I wasn't really expecting too much out of Friday. Um, Also, it had a really good week up until that point. So I wasn't expecting really anything. I guess really any sign of bad price action that I got pretty early on. I was kind of ready to just step away and just kind of lock myself out, or just log out. Um, Starting early, just kind of got that right. Really, you got kind of this first presented daily fair value gap. Um, Now, this is not really typically like an entry I'm going to take. The first 15 minutes are really important for me, especially when I don't have a very clear bias, kind of that's brewed or built up from last night, or maybe the day before. There are those days where I have an extremely strong bias, and maybe even within the first 10 minutes, something sets up. So I don't necessarily have a rule against taking a trade very early. But let's just say it takes a lot of convincing myself to do that, because you really want to see and let price play out, see in what direction it kind of displaces, trends, range, also how price moves, right? Because those are all going to be strong indicators on whether or not you want to be participating in the price action. So we started right out the gate with some displacement to the downside. And this is very similar to kind of the previous day, which was Thursday, where we had a pretty steep drop. And Thursday was definitely a little more violent. If I remember correctly, it was maybe almost 150 points, maybe more, of just kind of like a straight shot down. Um, a lot of displacement, but just a whole lot of red moving down. Um, but I also knew, the sentiment, right? When you look when you look online and when you understand uh, the type of market that we're in, as far as like this Trump headline sort of market, I knew the sentiment was just all time high. It's just more, it's higher, and in a lot of ways, I felt the same way. And I still have the same bias until price proves me wrong. And I think, obviously with Nvidia earnings coming this week, that could be a really strong catalyst. So very likely we see that as soon as this week or next week. But I knew it didn't have to be that day, and I knew especially on a Friday, we weren't that likely to see it. But I was probably leaning bullish as far as bias, but still a little bit neutral and just kind of waiting to see what happens. So you get that displacement right away. And that's typically what I'm first looking for. I'm looking for fair value gaps to be presented. And I want to see how price reacts to it. So it did actually react, right? And maybe there was someone that took this, right? I in my model, at least my form of trading, this would probably be too aggressive. But someone probably took this down. We got a move a bit lower. We got another very clear, just kind of open fair value gap, a little more displacement to the downside. But then what you continue to see is very like wiki impulse sort of moves and action. It's kind of hard because obviously, if you can't tell, this is Sunday night. I'm recording this. This is a recap. I'm doing this in replay mode. It's not live, but I'm going over just for journaling purposes and just for the sake of just like walking through my thought process. Um, when you're actually trading this live, this was really moving very choppy. Some of these candles you can't really tell, but for example, this is just a 1 minute chart, which typically that's where I take my executions. Um, Price was moving, it was coiling. It was moving very slow for some time, and then you get like a 10-15 second run where majority of the print on this candle came from a move that happened in 10-15 seconds, right? So normally when I see that sort of action, you don't get high probability setups. So I was getting more and more turned off, especially when we got to kind of like this 10 o'clock flip, right? Which is usually a pretty, pretty important macro, just kind of like checkpoint for you to see where prices moved. You get a lot of wicked moves there. So I wasn't too crazy. I really wasn't too crazy with what I was seeing. But again, this fair value gap up here on NQ, and I also have it marked on ES, was the first time where I was like, okay, we've moved since open by the time this was created. Maybe about 71, right? You're kind of coming towards a potential sweep of these lows, potential breakdown kind of this point. I knew that prices displaced multiple times to the downside, right? Even though I didn't act on these opportunities, it's still information that was important for me to have, right? I knew that it was a Friday, and sometimes when you get a green day towards the end of the week, price tends to sell off a bit. Um, you know, I really didn't have a strong bias, but the more that we continued to kind of grind down, it really seemed like the moves of impact were to the downside. So once we kind of got to this point and we created a fair value gap to the downside here, my first thought was like, okay, let me, I'm not actually going to rewind this just a bit so you don't kind of see what I was seeing there. So this is really where I was at, right? Just to give you full context. So this is what I was looking at, and I was like, okay, I'm gonna set a sell limit here, right? Because the way I'm gonna take these is gonna be pretty aggressive. I'm not waiting for a reaction off of them. As long as it touches, I'm getting in. I'm gonna risk, um, I'm gonna risk price going up above these highs. That would, in theory, invalidate my idea of the fact that this fair value gap or this volume imbalance will be touched, and then price would continue to the downside. Um, Being that I was taking the short, right, where price is, also being that it was a Friday, also being that I'd already made most of the profit that I kind of needed or wanted to make for the week. Did it by Thursday. This was very low risk for me, right? So I did this with two micros, but this was kind of the setup, and it was something I was willing to take. I understood price wasn't that great, so I just needed to take something um with levels, right, and risk that I was willing to kind of take here. So just going here. This was the idea, right? And then you continue to see price play out, and then you get more very long rangey wicks, and price failed to come up there. And then what we get is a minute here. All right. So this is a very big thing. And I think this is a very big hurdle for a lot of traders, right? So I did, like I just said, I had a sell limit in here. The idea was to look for a retrace up to this level for all the reasons I just explained, right? Displacement, the context, market sentiment. I was looking for shorts, and my buys flipped short once I had this, and I was ready to take it. I had to order in. Now, one thing that I feel like is very tough for traders to kind of learn, and I think honestly really only comes with like chart time, because I feel like that's the only way I was able to get through my head, or to actually be good at it, is being able to adapt and not marry an idea that you have. So, again, I had my limit order here, and normally, especially, I would say traders, this is a tough hurdle mentally, specifically for people that have a very defined model, right? So this isn't necessarily for beginners, but for people that have been trading for a while, right, aren't quite profitable yet, haven't really made much money, but they kind of know what they're doing. They're able to have enough kind of trust in their own selves and their trading, and they're confident. They're gonna leave this order here. And they're going to wait for that, because that's the idea that they committed to, right? And for a second, that was what I committed to, and I had kind of my confluence for why I was going to take that. But I also understood the context of how price was moving. We weren't getting, right? And I can look 1, 2, 3, 4 legs. We were getting very kind of clean. It was very, there was a pattern, right? So you get displacement, you get kind of like this coiled move up into imbalance, move down, displacement, kind of this coily sort of move, right? Um, and kind of move up, displace down. So this is kind of action that for me, typically I'm going to lean towards continuation and not just bearish. Same thing to the upside, right? Um, it almost just feels like every dip gets soaked, right? And when you're talking about bearish, every single rip is getting dumped. Um, and this is how you kind of adjust. So I understand the way price has been moving, right? Is it out of, is it unreasonable to expect that price could come up here? Sure. But I'm not marrying this idea just for the fact that I decided that it would be a good idea had it come up there right away when I actually put the order in. I understood that it didn't and it actually continued to move down. And then I got new displacement in a different spot, right? So now on ES, I get a fair value gap that was presented here, and it's very minimal here on NQ. I will take trades on NQ where a setup may present on ES for entry as long as I'm seeing a lack of divergence. As long as they're on the same page as far as lower lows, lower highs, and there isn't liquidity that's being taken on one that's not being taken on the other, I will use ES for entries on NQ because me personally, I just like trading NQ. I'm only going to trade NQ. So we got this fair value gap, this imbalance here presented on ES, and for me, that was my opportunity to get in. And really, it was just an understanding that at this point where price was, I saw it come down kind of close to the bottom of these wicks. And for me to wait for it to come up here would be me asking kind of a lot, right? I'd be asking for it to sweep kind of these highs, come up, and kind of create a leg in a way that it hadn't so far in that day. So I adapted. I saw again, I was able to read and see, okay, new displacement created. I'm going to adjust. So my game plan adjusted in the moment, which is important to be able to do, but very hard. It's a very simple thing, but it's very hard when you're actually doing it live. So I had this displacement, and then my entry, I just have to go back because I forget exactly where I got in again. And forgive me because this is all kind of in replay sort of mode. So we got in. Okay, no, these are old trades. We got in at 76.50 on NQ. Right? We risked a sweep of these highs. And then ultimately the final runner was taken out at 2019. So nothing huge. I mean, well, 57 points is nothing to sneeze at, but as far as like me taking 2 micros was definitely not even really full size, but still great execution. I kind of explained why I would have been kind of small risk here. So I did. So I took an entry here, and then we'll just kind of go through replay mode. By the time that we had swept kind of the lows of some of these wicks, I thought it'd be irresponsible of me to not take some off the table as well as kind of break even here. So I did. So I went break even here on the my runner. And then I took half of the profit at 2050, which ended up being 27 points in profit, give or take. And then this continues to run. End up taking full profit around 22.19, which ends up being almost 60 pointer, almost a 60-point trade. Which even with 2 micros is very good. So all in all, really good trading session. Just 1-0, well executed. It's just I think the biggest thing here, and it's a very small thing, but I think that someone who's been trading for a while can appreciate just the ability to kind of adapt to what the market is presenting you, because one thing that you're never going to be able to do is beat the market, right? And in reality, nothing we're doing changes anything on these charts, and this is a game being played at on a whale level that will probably never truly have any effect on. But you don't really need to be. You just need to understand and be able to read, and not have too much of an ego where you're thinking you're going to predict what's going to happen, and you marry an idea that ultimately ends up failing, because even though price was screaming at you that it's going the other way, You don't listen. So really just kind of a good showing of that, and good execution. So I'm gonna keep doing these sort of recaps. I'm gonna try to do some live when I can. I don't have the benefit of doing that all the time for you guys, but I'm gonna try to do it as much as I can. But when I can't do it live, I'll just go through a recap and even if it's just for the sake of journaling and kind of going through psychology here. But um, good trade, right? But can't stay complacent. We're not where we want to be at, so we got to continue. Um, and we'll be back for another one. I should be able to trade on Monday, but that's not going to be a live video either. But we'll do a recap for Monday the 24th. So.